I don't know him, but he sounds like a fascinating guy, an individual fellow, and I'm very anxious to see what we're going to hear from him. He's both sounds like a naturalist as well as a good stuff there. Who also interestingly enough said he didn't need any money to come here to give this talk, which few people say, and it's always welcome, but we do give them something. Okay, Wayne, you ready? Ready? Is your machine on? Can you speak?
He is here.
Now it is.
Okay.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Good? No? Can everybody hear me now? Yes, all right. Okay, awesome. Okay, perfect. I'll try to figure this out. Based on my age, I'm supposed to know it, but I won't guarantee it. All right. So I have the pleasure of presenting right after John McInnes. So you all kind of know a little bit of, you've seen a few maps of the Yellowknife area. So I've lived in Yellowknife for about 6.5 years now, and have taken a fair amount of time every summer to paddle the local area. Mostly in the area really close to Yellowknife. I haven't done a lot of trips very far from Yellowknife, but I'm here to kind of share my passion for harvesting off the land while canoeing and trying to go further with less weight. So, yeah. So just a quick overview map. This is Great Slave Lake in the middle. And Yellowknife, you can see, is the capital of the NWT, just on the north shore there. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit just to show you a few of the rivers. They're not labeled on the map, so I'll point them out. This river right here is the Bolio River, which I've paddled a couple summers ago. This one here is the Cameron River, which follows the Ingraham Trails. So it's one of the few rivers that's kind of accessible by road near Yellowknife. So it's got a lot of really short, accessible canoe routes. The Yellowknife River, of course, which goes straight to the north from Yellowknife. And then I believe this is the McCree River. Anyways, don't know that one as well. But then one that John McInnes talked about as well is the Waitshow River, goes up there. But there's lots of really good canoe routes right around Yellowknife. But I'm not going to focus so much on that. I'm focusing more on my food harvesting during those paddles. Okay, so this is a beautiful photo. I'm sure many of you know which berry that is, resting on top of the granola, harvested very near Yellowknife. But there's many reasons why I or any of you or anyone would want to harvest more from the land. And I did a little survey in Yellowknife of some avid canoeists to know kind of how much they harvest and how much they rely on it. And this was one quote I got back from a comment section on the survey. Just, it makes your day more exciting and your packs lighter. So a few of my own, I guess, just why I harvest from the land. It's kind of connecting to the land in a different way as well, of learning more about the plants and the fish and the mushrooms and relying on those. So it's connecting in a much more intimate way, I guess. And then stretching the canoe trips without adding more weight, so you can go longer and further without more bags and more weight. And also just for reasons of outdoor survival, if I can rely more on fish and know a few plants that I can collect and eat, then maybe when a bear gets into my bear barrel one night and steals my food, I can, not hit the button on my PLB and I can make it to the next community. I guess a little bit of research I've done says that the Aboriginals in the boreal forest typically relied on animal-derived food for about 95 to 97% of their diet. So really it was all about the meat. And I guess traveling just in the summer while canoeing is during the plant season, so we can rely a little more on berries and other plant foods than the Aboriginals did on a kind of an annual basis. But John McInnes talked about the Monfouy Trail, and me and 3 friends did the Monfouy Trail last year, and largely because of info that he passed along, it was a really attractive route, and we had 55 portages on that route, so we were very happy to be able to rely on fish a lot along the way, and other plants and berries. So I did a quick little survey in Yellowknife. I got 37 responses from other, I would say, in general, avid canoeists that I know. And there was a few different questions, but this was one of them. I asked, which statement is true for you? And it's, I'll read them quick, but I count on having some harvested food, such as fish, berries, plants, or small game. Or, I try to fish or harvest other food, but I don't rely on it, and I take enough food for the whole trip. And lastly, I don't fish or harvest other food. So before I show you the results from the 37 responses I got in Yellowknife, I want to do a quick, I don't know if someone can turn on the lights, if there's someone close, but I wanted to do a survey of the people in the audience here of which statement holds for you when you're doing canoe trips. So maybe we'll start at the top. So for people that say they count on having some harvested foods such as fish, berries, plants, or small game, raise your hands. While you're out canoeing, if you're on a long canoe trip, would you count on having some harvested food while you're canoeing, while you're packing your food? So not so many, okay? And for people that say, I try to fish or harvest other food, but I don't rely on it, and I take enough food for the whole trip. All right, so that's pretty much the whole crowd, okay? Very good. And those that say I don't fish or harvest other food. There's a few too, yeah, okay. So fair number actually, okay, very good. So in doing the survey in Yellowknife, I realized there was 1 or 2 people that wrote that they were actually allergic to fish. There was one person that was allergic to trout and all dark meat fish, but anyway. So the responses from Yellowknife were about a full third of the responses I got back, and again, this is, I would say, generally avid canoeists, said that they counted on having some harvested food during their trip. So when they were planning their food for their trip or whatever, they would count on having at least some. And then a full 65%, which is again was by far the majority here as well. I try to fish or harvest other food, but I don't rely on it, and I take enough food for the whole trip. So. And there was only 1 out of the 37 responses I got. One person said that they don't do any harvesting. Okay, and so one other interesting question was, how often do you typically eat fish or other harvested foods during a canoe trip on average? So of those 37 responses I got, 36 out of 37 said that they fish and eat fish on a specific question asked about fish. So that seems like a pretty normal thing during long canoe trips. So I'm going to do the survey here again. How many people would say that they would eat fish or other harvested food once every couple days or less? Okay, so it's probably half or more than half maybe. Okay. How many people would say that they harvest food they would eat on average once a day? Okay, there's a few, couple, okay. And more than once a day? 1, yeah. Person from the NWT, my girlfriend. Okay. Okay. Guess that's why I'm doing this presentation, eh? Okay. Okay, so then of the 37 responses I got back in Yellowknife, a full 50% said once every couple days or less, and then about a third actually said once a day on average, and 14%, so that was maybe about 5 people, I guess, out of 37 would say more than once a day. So, yeah, so it was interesting to see that, 50% of the people that responded to the survey in Yellowknife said that they would eat wild harvested foods once a day or more often on average. So this is a quote from the survey that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to show. Someone just wrote, "This is a sustainable and tasty way to make a long canoe trip more rewarding and manageable. I add fish to almost every meal, mac and cheese and fish, chili and fish, etc. Berries, mushrooms, other plants too." So I thought that was a really good quote that I wanted to share with you. Okay. So one thing that I kind of an approach to harvesting that I've had ever since I first took a mushroom identification course in university in Edmonton before I ever moved to Yellowknife. One thing they taught a lot about, they talked about in mushroom IDing is there's hundreds of mushrooms out there, and there's a lot of not so good ones and a few toxic ones and then a few really good ones. And so the real key was don't go find a mushroom and then try to identify it by sifting through your book and whatever. The key is to learn a couple really good mushrooms that grow in your area and then go looking for those. And so I've kept the same philosophy kind of for plants, and it's a lot less stressful, a lot more straightforward, and easier if you learn a few select species and just go look for those, rather than trying to identify or know every single mushroom or other plant you might encounter. Okay. So I mentioned the Bolio River. This was one of my favorite trips near Yellowknife. This picture is on the Bolio, and the canoe looks a little wet, but we didn't dunk, we didn't go over. It was all good. And we had loads of blueberries on this trip. This was one of the most amazing trips I've ever done for blueberries. It was a 2-week trip, and the whole first week we were in prime blueberry season. It was kind of mid-August, early August. And so we had blueberries with almost every meal. And we would add them to meals whichever way we could. And there's also a lot of Arctic grayling on the top of the Bolio. So pretty much every dinner would be either lake trout or Arctic grayling. And on the Bolio trip, again, out of 2 weeks, there was only one dinner that we didn't have fish. So it was a wild harvest trip for sure. So this is a close-up of the blueberry that we have in the area around Yellowknife. This is Vaccinium uligonosum, I think they call it. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's actually a type of bilberry, not blueberry. It's slightly different. Everybody calls it blueberry, but it's a little different, but it's fairly quick to harvest, and I would say a very good favorite of the locals around Yellowknife. It's definitely my favorite, I think. Maybe after raspberries, because raspberries are generally a little easier to find right near Yellowknife. But the bilberry grows a lot in kind of boggy areas, so sometimes on portages along a river. They're fairly easy to find. Another one that maybe isn't quite as easy to find, but in really moist areas next to streams or waterfalls, you'll find black currants and red currants. It's amazing, actually, the season around Yellowknife. I actually did a kind of a berry study for an organization in Yellowknife and did some weather analysis. And the climate near Yellowknife is actually more reliable than even the Canadian prairies. And it's maybe a combination of the long sunlight days and the bedrock, which holds the heat, as well as Great Slave Lake, which moderates the climate. But we have less risk of midsummer frosts than the prairies, and we have warmer nighttime temperatures. So even though the season is a little shorter, it's more reliable, and so we actually get really good berries. And probably the limiting factor really in our region is lack of rainfall. So that's probably the biggest limiting factor to kind of berry productivity. But these are actually on Blanchett Island on Great Slave Lake. Near a little waterfall, there was loads of black currants and red currants. And another berry that's actually probably the easiest to find anywhere near Yellowknife, but isn't perhaps the most common, just because it's not very sweet, but it's really juicy, is the crowberry. So it grows on this really low, kind of evergreen-looking plant, but it's really easy to pick. Again, you can kind of just milk the the stalks of the plant. It makes really good crowberry liqueur. If you take a glass bottle, and just fill it with crowberries and pour vodka over top, and then let it sit for about 6 months, it's super good. Okay, and ones that you probably are more familiar with from berries that are more common down south too is raspberries and Saskatoons. Saskatoons are actually a pretty rare find around Yellowknife, but once in a while at rapids and moisture areas, you'll find a few. They're always a little stunted and a little sad looking, but you can still find some good ones sometimes. Raspberries are fairly easy to find and grow pretty well up there. This is the photo on the right there. That raspberry plant is one that I've used in many reports about berries and presentations about berries. It's that plant was about no more than 10 centimeters tall and had about 20 or 30 berries on it. So it's pretty incredible. And actually, the cranberry is the one that's the most harvested, I guess, around Yellowknife by locals. Definitely the one people pick the most and spend the most time out in the really late fall picking. Generally, it's best after the first frost. But the wonderful thing about cranberries is that they actually overwinter really well. So even early in the spring, you can find cranberries from the previous year, and they taste even better the next spring. So this was actually just up on the tundra on the Montfouille Trail, and this was on it was one of the last few lakes, maybe Grizzlebear or Dry Meat, and we had found cranberries that had overwintered, so we had more than we could eat for the last couple of days of our trip there. So we were eating them with, again, every meal. We found a lot on portages, so I put in this little photo there you can see of our canoe on a portage. That's where we'd find the cranberries. And on a trip a little bit later this past summer on Great Slave Lake, we took along a pretty good bag of sugar because we thought, well, we're going to pick berries and preserve them and make jam along the way. So this is a big pot of cloudberry jam and a big pot of raspberry jam. So on Great Slave Lake, it's a pretty big lake for a canoe. And so we had a few windbound afternoons, and we would often spend those windbound afternoons picking berries and making jam. So. And one of my favorites, actually, is the pots that I use for camping. The lid can flip upside down and fit really nicely in the pot, so I can make it into a double boiler. So then I can melt chocolate and have a chocolate fondue. And so we'd have a chocolate fondue with blueberries. So it stretches the chocolate, too. It's amazing how little chocolate you need when you melt it and add a whole bunch of blueberries. But you don't want to run out of chocolate. Okay. This is, I guess, one of the first plants that I started harvesting around Yellowknife was chives. They're not super plentiful right around Yellowknife, but once you get into a little bit colder area from Yellowknife up, say, the Upper Bolio or the east arm of Great Slave Lake, you can find a lot of them in really open, rocky areas, sometimes in little cracks where the water runs down the rock. And they're great. They pair very well with lake trout, so the two of them together makes a great meal. And so one thing I want to mention about, someone mentioned yesterday the thought of taking new people on canoe trips and taking people that are maybe haven't done a lot of canoeing before. And I certainly had that pleasure on the Montfouille Trail. The three other people I was with certainly weren't fishermen and hadn't done a lot of fishing. And so this is my friend Jacob. He came on the trip and he had done a little bit of fishing before, but not much. And but I told him, I'm like, yeah, we can rely on fish on this trip. I'm like, you know what? I'm counting on four out of 5 of my dinners with fish. So I'm not bringing other protein of sorts, or, you know, there has to be fish for those 4. We're going to be hungry. And he's like, okay, well, I'll do that too. So he did it too. So he planned his meals and had to have fish for 4 out of 5 meals. And at the beginning, we had a load of portages, and so it was a bit of work actually to to catch the fish because we'd wait too late in the day to start fishing because we didn't want to pack them over all the portages. And then these 3 other people hadn't really done a lot of fishing. So, but by the end of it, Jacob was catching tons of fish and he was super happy to be catching them. He really turned into a fisherman over the trip. So it was really cool to see. And he always had this huge smile on his face. And so one thing I guess I've learned when relying on fish for a long trip is that you need to be able to cook it in a variety of ways because you're eating the same fish every dinner. And there's Arctic grayling and there's lake trout and there's pike and whitefish if you're patient. But still, it's good to cook it in a variety of ways. So I build rock ovens sometimes. I'll take a few rocks and try to find big ones and be able to lay the fish. I'll fillet the fish but leave the skin on and then just lay it on the rock. And if I have enough rocks around it, I can get it baking really well. And then I can just put in a bit of a fire and kind of ignore it for a while. And then one thing I didn't do until this last summer for the first time was took along a few lemons. And so we actually made ceviche one time, which is where you just cut the fish into really thin strips and then put it in a container with lots of lemon juice. And then just let it sit for 5 or 6 hours. And the lemon juice actually cooks the fish, so you don't have to heat it at all. So this was one of our shore lunches with sourdough biscuits and blueberry jam and ceviche. So that was with lake trout, and there's chives in that as well. So, and this is a little inset photo of where we were. This is on the south shore of Blanchett Island in Great Slave Lake. So. And another thing we did on the Montfrey Trail, there was one day when we had a little too much fish and we couldn't eat it all in one meal. Then we dried it over the fire. So basically in the late evening, just after the fire had died, we put it on the grill over the coals and then just put a tin foil over top. And so by early morning, it was totally dried, and then we could have it as a snack during the day. And we're planning a 2-month trip this summer, paddling from Yellowknife to the Arctic Ocean, to Kugluktuk. And we've actually sewn a small smoking tent so that partway along the trip we can stop, catch a few fish, and smoke them. Because certainly on the Coppermine River, there's a few stretches where it's difficult to catch fish because of murky waters and whatnot. So it'll be nice to be able to kind of stop halfway through the trip and resupply a bit with some dried or smoked fish. So another emphasis on how much fun it is to take along people that are maybe haven't done long canoe trips or all that much fishing. And these are both the pictures of Jacob catching his first Arctic grayling and Leanne catching her first Arctic grayling, and the huge smiles. And yeah, it's really cool to see the excitement of people that on their first trip like that. And this is another plant. I'm wondering if anyone can guess what the plant is just by the image. I don't know. Anybody? I'm sorry. Sorry? Wild leeks. Okay, you're close. You're close. All right, these are actually cattails. So they kind of look a bit like leeks for sure. Basically, the cattail is an amazing plant. You can harvest it at any time in the summer. You can eat the rhizomes on the bottom of the root are edible. They're kind of a starchy. You can use them to make a flour. You can use the stalks, the very inner lower stalks of the plants, kind of any time in the summer. The heads as well. Early in the year, I haven't actually eaten the heads before. I will be this summer, but the heads, apparently when they're fairly green, you can cook them and eat them kind of just like corn. But this is the inner lower stalk. So if you pull out a cattail, there's about maybe 6 inches of the bottom of the stalk on the inside that's really soft and tender. And it makes a great stir fry. So that's the cattail, of course. Okay. And so one more thing that is kind of harvesting off the land, but not for food, but wood as well. So I've never used a stove in the north. I've always just cooked off wood. And this summer for the Montfouille Trail, I wasn't quite sure how much wood we'd have at the very end. So we made a rocket stove here. I just made it out of 3 tin cans. It's basically just a coffee can on the outside, a little smaller can on the inside, and then a really tiny can on the side to feed wood in. So right here, we'd feed the wood in from the side. And it was amazing, actually. You had to always tilt the intake there into the wind, kind of, but it would work pretty well. So, yeah, we cooked a lot on that. And we'd often have our big pot over the fire, but then our small pot or anything we were stir-frying or cooking in a pan, we'd have over the rocket stove. So, and the gap between the 2 cans, the inside can and the outside can, we'd fill with small pebbles or with sand, and that kind of retains the heat and prevents the fire from going out very quickly. Okay. And so, yeah, in the end, being able to rely more on fish and off plants and berries harvested from the wild allows us to really to paddle longer and further without more weight. And so when we did the Montfouille Trail, we had about 10 liters per person per week of food volume. And I think we're going to be shrinking that quite a bit for our trip this summer. But another goal of an ultimate weight goal kind of, I think, is about 1.5 pounds per person per day for food weight. And generally, so far in my trips around Yellowknife, definitely it's an area I know well, so I know how to catch fish and know the plants and whatnot. But I've generally, when I'm packing my food and planning for a trip, I'll count on about 80% of my dinners having fish, and then also a few breakfasts and lunches. And in the end, on our 3-week Montfouille trip, we averaged more than 1 meal a day with fish. And there was one stretch where we went 9 meals straight with fish in every meal, so including breakfast and lunches. So, and yeah, I've started more taking sugar along to preserve and sweeten berries along the way, and taking just a bunch of spices for the fish, just to be able to cook it in a variety of ways. And again, now we've made the smoking tent so that we can, for stretches of a river where we know we won't be able to catch many fish or where it might be difficult, we can resupply on fish. We're planning again this summer a 2-month trip with no food resupply, and we're hoping to do everything right from the beginning, even with 2 carries on the portages. So. And with only a 16-foot canoe, too. So, this was another quote that I really liked. We have relied on fish for a meal every second day on average. We have enough food so that if there are no fish, we are hungry but not starving. So, yeah. Great. And then, of course, in the north, there's good enough fishing that sometimes the problem is just that the fish are too big. So what do you do if if you're out with 2 people and you catch a fish, that's enough for, 8 people or something. But yeah, in that case, we often put them back or smoke them, one of the 2. But yeah. And so one book that I recently discovered that's really good, that describes a lot of the plants that you can harvest, and where to find them in the NWT. This book is really focused on the northern region of the NWT, harvesting the northern wild. It's out of print now, but you can find it on Amazon or other used book stores. So, yeah. So that's it. Can I mention one more? I wanted to say one more thing, that I was very happy to see the presentation earlier that talked about, George, you relying on or counting in your food figures of, I think, 4 dinners of fish out of a week, something like that.
Yeah, let me share a couple of food issues. One of the first trips in the Barrenlands, we didn't have enough food. There was a lot of cold weather and ice and everything else. And when I was young, I didn't have that much body fat extra. And I was losing weight and very hungry and unhappy about that. So I said, in the future, you always carry more than less. It's better to have 20 pounds in excess than be 5 pounds short. And so that used to be practice for a long, long time. As I got older, I had a little extra fat on here. And I remember the last several solo trips, I had the following situation where, well, one time I caught a fish, and the damn fish was too big. It took me like 3 days to eat it, and I hated that fish by the end of the second. I said, no more fish on this trip. But no, the other thing that was happening on some of those solo trips, I had a lot of food with me, and I had like 3 carries. And some of them were hard days, and by the end of the day, I was so tired, I wasn't hungry, so I wouldn't eat. And then so after several or a week of that, I have this 20, 30 pounds of food that I had to dump. And what I would have to then do is uncut all the plastic, burn that, and leave the food on the land for the animals to eat after. And so the irony is, I was beating myself to death by carrying heavy packs with lots of food to the extent that I wasn't hungry. I didn't want to eat it anymore, and then having to burn it. So that was the feedback system that I was in on 1 or 2 trips. Anyways, I'm going on. Let's get Zabi on. It's time for her to get on here and talk. Sorry, Zabi. And Zabi, when you leave, this is for you.